Welcome back, Sebastian here. So with 6 of the first 8 races of the 2023 Formula 1 season being street circuits, I thought it would be a good chance to look at Formula 1's obsession with street circuits through history and look at all of the street circuits that we've had in Formula 1 over the years, going all the way back to the 1950s, and also looking at how much of the calendar they make up in each decade. So we're starting off with street circuits through history. So in the 1950s, we had 4 street circuits. And this is not including some of the road circuits that we had in the early 50s, including F1’s in Germany or Bremgarten in Switzerland. So of course that starts right in 1950 with Monaco, and we've had 69 races there. Then in 1951, the following year, we had a street circuit in Spain in Pedralbes, I think. I don't know what the proper pronunciation is, but we had 2 races there. 1958, Boa Vista in Portugal, another 2 races there. The last race of that decade to make its debut was Monsanto, which I believe was also in Spain, and there was only 1 race there. In the 1960s, we only had 1 street circuit at that decade, one new street circuit that decade, and that was the infamous Montjuic street circuit in Spain, which was debuted in 1969, and we had 4 races there. Going into the 1970s, 2 new street circuits, Long Beach, which debuted in 1976, and Gilles Villeneuve, which debuted in 1978. Of course, Long Beach, only 8 Grand Prix there, but Gilles Villeneuve still used to this day for the Canadian Grand Prix. 41 Grand Prix have been held there as of the recording of this video, and of course it will be 42 after next weekend. Into the 1980s. So this is where I think the historical parallels get really interesting. So we have 5 new street circuits this decade. Caesar's Palace in 1981, 2 races. Detroit in 1982, 7 races. Dallas in 1984, 1 race. Adelaide in 1985, 11 races. And Phoenix in 1989, 3 races. So we have 5 new street circuits in the 1980s, 4 of them in the United States, and except for Detroit, they're all used for 3 or less years, so a lot of turnover there in the US races. 1990s, 1 race and 1 new street circuit, and that was, of course, Albert Park, which debuted in 1996, which was a replacement for Adelaide, and we've had 26 races there to this date. Into the 2000s, 2 new street circuits, which were both at the tail end of the 2000s. Valencia in 2008, which had only 5 races, and of course Marina Bay in Singapore, which we continue to use to this day, and we've had 13 races there so far. Into the 2010s, only 1 new street circuit in the 2010s, which is kind of surprising. I would have expected this number to be a bit bigger. And of course that is Baku, which we've had 7 races at, and which debuted in 2016. Now going into the 2020s, of course, was only 4 seasons in this decade, and we're already up to 3 new street circuits, and those are of course Jeddah in 2021 with 3 races, Miami in 2022 with 2 races, and Vegas which debuts later this year, and of course has no races to this point. Of course, also in 2020 we were supposed to have the inaugural Vietnam Grand Prix, which is also a street circuit, but of course that race never happened, and the race has effectively been canceled. So really, I think it's really interesting that, you know, that's only the last couple of decades, we've only had like 1 or 2 every decade, but then only 4 years into this decade, the 2020s, we're already up to 3, and of course that number could rise even higher. Of course, it doesn't, still not nowhere close to relatively to the 80s, where we had 5 new street circuits as well. So, of course, the one thing I want to mention with this is that with the US races in the 1980s, of course, Bernie, who was basically in charge of F1 at the time, and of course it was a bit different back then. I don't even think Bernie was in charge. I think it was FISA and FOCA. But basically they wanted to have a US race, but basically the track that they raced at through much of the 70s and 60s, which was Watkins Glen, was basically deemed too unsafe for Formula 1. So they basically, but in order, they wanted to keep a US Grand Prix, and so they basically started this revolving door of street circuits, including Caesar's Palace, Detroit, Phoenix, all the ones I basically just mentioned as well. Now, let's go into the next part, which is the percentage part. So, of course, I'm not going to do every year because a lot of the years are going to be the same and there's not really much point. So, I've just gone and taken the last, gone every 10 years, once every 10 years, going all the way up to this year. So, the first year, 1953, 9 races, no street circuits. Of course, one of the few years where there was no Monaco Grand Prix, so 0% street circuits. 1963, 10 races, 1 street circuit, and that of course was Monaco, so it's a nice round 10%. 1973, 15 races, 2 streakers, Monaco and Montjuic, so that's about 13% of the calendar. 1983, 15 races, 4 street circuits, Long Beach, Monaco, Detroit, and Gilles Villeneuve in Canada, and that is what accounts for 27% of the F1 calendar. 1993, 16 races, only 3 street circuits, and those are Monaco, Gilles Villeneuve, and Adelaide in 1993. 2003, 16 races, again only 3 street circuits, and again the same percentage, 19%, except this time it's Melbourne, Monaco, and Gilles Villeneuve. 2013, calendars expanded up to 19 races, and we have 4 street circuits, which account for 21% of the calendar, and those are of course Melbourne, Monaco, Gilles Villeneuve, and Singapore. Now going another 10 years, 2023, 22 race seasons so far for this year, and 8 street circuits, so that's a whopping 36%. Of course, we already know what those street circuits are, but I might as well just go through in case. Jeddah, Albert Park, Melbourne, Baku, Miami, Monaco, Gilles Villeneuve, Singapore, and Vegas. So basically in only 10 years, from 2013 all the way to 2023, we've jumped up, we've almost doubled. We've doubled the number of street races we've barely expanded the calendar as well. So way more street circuits than usual historically in Formula One this year. And also a lot of them are concentrated, like I said, in the first 8 races. So we have 6 of the first 8 races are street circuits, and then in the remaining 14 races we only have 2 left, which are Singapore and Las Vegas. And I think the reality is that Formula One's current commercial owners, Liberty Media, are really pushing street circuits. They're really pushing it for a variety of reasons, I think. I think one is that there's a lot less financial commitment to hosting a race at a street circuit compared to building a purpose-built track. So whereas a purpose-built track, that track is going to be there for 40, 50 years, and it's going to be constantly going to have money needing to be invested in it. A street circuit, you don't really need to invest as much money in it. You may need to repave the roads, of course you need to get the barriers and everything, and the seating as well, but generally the financial investment is a lot less for a street circuit. The other thing as well is that you don't have to have races all year in order to get financial stability. Many of the circuits, purpose-built circuits on the calendar, Spa, Coda, for example, do tend to have some financial difficulties dealing with financial issues. But of course, that's not an issue on a street circuit. That's only built for basically one race of the year, for one race a year. And of course, I think, unfortunately, another reason that we have had this shift towards so many street circuits is it's easier to market for corporations, for executives, and for celebrities. I think it's much easier to market Miami Grand Prix compared to a US Grand Prix East. I think it's also the reason why we've had some naming changes for some of the Grand Prix. So, for example, the Brazilian Grand Prix is technically known as the Sao Paulo Grand Prix now, to make it more attractive, and because I believe the Sao Paulo city government paid basically some money to have it changed to the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. Same way that Mexico is called the Mexico City Grand Prix as well. I think it's more attractive for celebrities, more attractive for corporations to have these F1 races at these kind of destination cities. I think unfortunately that's kind of where Formula One's going to be going in the next couple of years. I've heard rumors that as soon as Barcelona's Catalunya circuit's contract is up, they're going to try to move the race to a street circuit in Madrid, which I think is quite unfortunate. I think the reality is that the purpose-built circuits are the bread and butter, and they're really the backbone of Formula One. And the racing on street circuits, I mean, this video isn't even really talking about the racing aspect of it, but I generally do think that the racing on purpose-built tracks is generally much better than on street circuits. Of course, there are some differences there, like obviously not all street circuits are bad for racing, but that being said, generally on average, I would say that purpose-built tracks do provide better racing. So I think that's really it for this video. I think it's a nice overview at looking at street circuits through F1 history and looking at how they've changed and which ones are still on the calendar, of course. So thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, and please subscribe if you want to see more future content. It really helps out the channel as well. I think for comments, I guess, please comment below what is your favorite street circuit on the modern F1 calendar. I think for me, if I had to guess, I think maybe being a bit biased, I would have to go with Gilles Villeneuve. I think it probably provides some of the best consistent racing of the street circuits we have in Formula 1 today. And I think the layout's quite challenging and quite unique as well amongst street circuits. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.